It doesn't mean nothing affected them. It means it hasn't reached them yet. Because with avoidance, what happens in the moment is not always what they feel. Everything lands just later. Emotions don't always move in real time. For an avoidance system, there is often a delay, not because nothing was felt, because it wasn't fully processed. In the moment, when something happens, a conversation, a reaction, an emotional exchange, they are present, they respond, they engage. But internally, the experience is not complete because their system prioritizes stability. It prioritizes staying regulated, staying composed, staying unaffected, enough to function. So instead of fully feeling what is happening, it contains it, not suppressing completely, postponing, holding it, setting it aside for later. And that later is where things begin. Because once the moment passes, once they are alone, once the interaction is no longer active, the system relaxes, and what was held begins to surface, not all at once. Gradually, a thought returns, a feeling becomes clearer, a moment replays differently, and now they are not responding to the interaction. They are processing it, but processing it after the fact, without you there, without the context of the moment, without the ability to resolve it in real time. And that delay changes everything, because what they feel now is disconnected from when it happened. So their reaction doesn't align with the moment. It aligns with the delayed experience. And that creates a gap between what happened and how it is eventually felt. And inside that gap, things can shift. Something that felt neutral in the moment can feel heavy later. Something that felt manageable can feel overwhelming. After reflection, something that felt small can grow once it's processed fully, because now there is space. Space to think, space to feel, space for the system to catch up to the experience. And when it does, the impact can feel stronger, not because it changed, because it was fully felt. And this is where confusion begins, because from the outside, nothing is happening. The moment passed, the conversation ended, everything seemed fine. But internally, something is now unfolding, something that wasn't visible before. And because it wasn't expressed in the moment, it doesn't get addressed. It doesn't get clarified. It doesn't get resolved. It stays internal, quiet, unshared. And that internal processing starts shaping how they feel. After the fact, not immediately, but gradually, they begin to reinterpret what happened, to assign meaning to moments that seemed simple, to feel the emotional weight they didn't access before. And that weight doesn't just disappear, it accumulates across different moments, different interactions, different experiences that were never fully processed when they happened. And over time, those delayed reactions begin to connect, forming a pattern, a quiet internal narrative about how the connection feels, not based on real-time experience, based on processed experience. And that difference matters, because now their feelings are not aligned with what is happening. They are aligned with what has already happened. And that creates a disconnect between you and their internal world, because you are experiencing the present. They are processing the past. And when those two timelines don't match, the connection starts to feel different. Not because something is wrong, because everything is being felt on a delay. And that delay is where everything begins to change. That delay does not stay isolated. It begins to affect how they move through the connection in real time. Because now, what they are feeling is not just about this moment. It's about what surfaced after the last one. And that means they are never fully starting fresh. They are carrying something forward, something that was felt later, something that wasn't expressed, something that wasn't resolved. So when they return to you, they are not just meeting you in the present, they are meeting you with what is caught up inside them. And that changes their energy. Subtly, but consistently, they may seem slightly more distant, slightly more contained, slightly less open than they were before. Not because the current moment caused it, because the previous one finally landed. And now, they are responding to that, quietly, without explaining it. Because to them, it doesn't feel like a delay. It feels current. It feels real right now, even though it belongs to something that already passed. And that's where the misalignment begins. You are responding to what is happening now. They are responding to what they felt after. Two different timelines, meeting in the same space. And that creates confusion, because from your side, the shift feels sudden, unexpected, unconnected to anything that just happened. But from their side, it feels like a continuation, like something that has been building, something that is now fully felt. And because that feeling arrives later, it doesn't get processed together. It doesn't get spoken about in context. It becomes an internal experience, one that shapes how they show up, without ever being shared. And this is where patterns begin to form, because each time something is delayed, it gets added to what is already there. Each interaction leaves something behind. Each moment creates an impression that isn't fully processed until later. And when those impressions finally surface, they don't come alone. They come together, layered, accumulated, felt all at once. And that can feel intense, not because one moment was overwhelming, because many moments are being felt at the same time. And when that happens, their system responds in a specific way. It reduces input, it contains exposure, it limits how much more can be added, because what they are processing internally already feels like a lot. And from the outside, this looks like a shift, a change in how they show up. They become less responsive, less expressive, less emotionally available. Not completely, just enough to manage what they are feeling. And that change feels disconnected to you because you're looking at the present moment. And the present moment doesn't explain it, but the delay does. Because what you're seeing is not a reaction to now, it's a response to what finally landed from before. And because this keeps happening, the connection starts to feel uneven, out of sync. Moments feel good while they're happening, but something shifts after. Energy changes without a clear reason. Closeness builds, then feels reduced later. And that pattern repeats, not because they are inconsistent, because their processing is delayed. And that delay keeps moving them out of alignment with the present moment, always slightly behind, always catching up, always feeling something after it already happened. And unless that delay is understood, it will always feel like something changes without reason, when in reality, the reason simply arrived later than expected. As that delay keeps repeating, it starts to shape not just moments, but the entire rhythm of the connection. Because now it's not just that feelings arrive later, it's that every new moment is layered on top of something that hasn't fully settled yet. So instead of moving cleanly from one experience to the next, they are carrying residue, emotional residue, unprocessed impressions, feelings that surfaced after the fact and never found a place to go. And that residue does something subtle. It changes how open they feel before anything even happens, because now they are not entering A moment empty. They are entering it, already holding something, something unfinished, something unresolved, something they may not even fully understand. And that creates a baseline shift, a quiet shift in how they experience connection overall. They begin to feel slightly more guarded before anything new even occurs, slightly more contained before anything asks them to be, not because of the present, because of what is still active from the past. And that's what makes the delay so impactful. It doesn't just affect reactions, it affects readiness. Their readiness to be open, their readiness to be expressive, their readiness to fully engage without holding back, because part of them is still processing, still catching up, still trying to make sense of what already happened. And when someone is still processing, they don't expand easily. They regulate, they manage, they limit. How much more can be added? And that limit starts shaping their behavior. They become more selective with how much they give, more measured with how deeply they engage, more aware of how much they allow themselves to feel. Not because they don't want closeness, because closeness adds more to process, and more to process feels like more weight. So instead of letting things build freely, they begin to pace the connection, to slow it down, to keep it within a range that feels manageable. And that pacing creates a pattern where closeness builds in the moment, but gets adjusted later. A pattern where connection feels present, but doesn't fully carry forward the same way, because what was felt afterward is still influencing what happens next. And that influence is quiet, but consistent. They might feel close to you during an interaction, open, engaged, present, but later, when everything catches up, that same moment might feel different, heavier, more intense, more impactful than it seemed in real time. And that reinterpretation doesn't stay isolated. It becomes part of how they feel about the connection as a whole, because now their experience is not based only on what happens live. It's based on what unfolds after. And that after effect can shift meaning. Something that felt simple can feel significant. Something that felt easy can feel demanding. Something that felt light can feel like it carried more emotional weight than expected. And once that meaning shifts, their behavior follows. Not immediately, but gradually. They begin to approach the connection differently, with more caution, more awareness, more internal checking, because now they know what seems manageable in the moment might not feel that way later. And that anticipation changes how they show up. They begin to pre-regulate, to adjust before the feeling even arrives, to prevent a delayed reaction from becoming overwhelming. And that pre-regulation creates distance, not in a dramatic way, in a subtle one. They don't fully lean in the same way. They don't fully open the same way. They don't fully invest the same way, because part of them is already accounting for what might come later. What will this feel like after? Will this be too much once it catches up? Will I have to process more than I can handle? And those questions don't stay in words. They translate into behavior, into tone, into presence. They shorten moments that feel like they could become intense. They redirect before things deepen too far. They maintain a level of control over how much is happening, because control means less to process later, less to catch up to, less emotional backlog. And from their side, this feels necessary, like they are managing their capacity, like they are keeping things balanced. But from your side, it feels different, because what you experience is not their intention, it's the effect of their timing, the way closeness doesn't carry forward, the way openness doesn't expand consistently, the way something that felt good in the moment doesn't feel the same later. And that inconsistency creates confusion because you're responding to the present, and the present felt real. It felt connected. It felt aligned. But their experience of that moment has not finished yet. It's still unfolding, still being processed, still being felt in ways that may not match what you experienced. And that creates a disconnect, not in care, in timing, because connection relies on shared experience, on feeling things together, understanding things in the same moment. But when one person is feeling it later, that shared experience breaks, not completely, but enough to change how things feel. You begin to feel out of sync, like something doesn't line up, like the energy shifts without reason, like closeness comes and goes in a way you can't fully explain. And that's because it's not happening in one timeline. It's happening in two. Yours, in real time. Theirs, in delayed time. And those two timelines keep crossing, keep overlapping, but never fully aligning. And over time, that misalignment creates a pattern, a connection that feels good in moments, but inconsistent overall, a connection that feels present, but unstable over time, a connection that builds, but doesn't hold the same way, because what is built in the moment is always being reprocessed later, reinterpreted, refelt, and sometimes reduced, not because it wasn't real, because it was fully felt after the fact, and that full feeling can be more than their system wants to carry. So instead of integrating it, they regulate it, they bring it down, they contain it, they adjust their level of openness, moving forward. And that adjustment becomes cumulative. Each delayed reaction adds something. Each reprocessed moment changes something. Each internal shift reshapes how they show up next time, until the connection no longer feels the same. Not because something obvious happened, because everything was felt later and shaped quietly over time. And once that pattern is established, it sustains itself, because every new moment feeds into it. Every interaction gets delayed. Every delay adds to the backlog. Every backlog influences the next moment. And the cycle continues, quietly, consistently, without ever needing a clear turning point. Because the turning point is not a moment, it's the delay itself, the space between experience and feeling. And inside that space, everything changes. When you finally see this clearly, the confusion starts to settle, because now you're not trying to make sense of random changes. You're seeing a pattern, a rhythm, a timing difference that explains everything you've been feeling. Not inconsistency, not mixed signals, a delay, a gap between experience and emotion. And once you understand that, you stop asking the same questions. You stop asking, why did this feel good? And then change. You stop asking, why do they seem present? Then different later. Because now you see it. What you experienced in the moment was real. What they felt after was also real. But those two realities didn't happen at the same time. And that's what created the disconnect. Because connection relies on shared timing, on feeling something together, understanding it in the same moment. But when one person is feeling it later, the connection loses that alignment. Not completely, but enough to change how it unfolds. And that's why you felt it. That subtle shift, that quiet change in energy, that sense that something didn't carry forward the same way, because it didn't. Not for them, because their experience was still unfolding after you left it, still processing, still catching up, still forming meaning from something you had already lived through. And once that meaning formed, it shaped how they showed up next, not consciously, automatically, because their system adjusts based on what it feels, even if that feeling arrived late. And that adjustment is what you experienced as change, not in the moment, after. And once you recognize that, you stop personalizing it, not in a dismissive way, in a clear way. You stop assuming you did something wrong. You stop replaying what you said. You stop trying to fix something that didn't break in real time, because now you understand. It wasn't the moment. It was the processing. It was the delay. It was what surfaced after everything seemed fine. And that clarity gives you something important: perspective. Because now you're no longer reacting to surface behavior. You're understanding the internal timing behind it. And that changes how you relate to what you experience. You begin to see the pattern. Instead of chasing each moment, you begin to recognize the rhythm. Instead of questioning each shift, you begin to understand that what feels sudden to you is often delayed for them. And that understanding brings you to a deeper truth. This is not just about behavior. It's about capacity. Their capacity to process emotions in real time. Their capacity to stay present while feeling deeply. Their capacity to integrate experience as it happens instead of after. And if that capacity has a delay, then the connection will always carry that delay, no matter how strong the moments feel, no matter how real. The connection is in real time, because what is not fully processed in the moment will always return later. And when it returns, it will shape what comes next. And that means you are not just in one experience. You are in a cycle where moments happen, feelings are delayed, processing happens later, behavior adjusts, new moments happen, and the cycle repeats, quietly, consistently, without needing a clear explanation. And once you fully see that, you stop trying to control it. You stop trying to align everything. You stop trying to make sure every moment lands perfectly, because now you understand. You are not just relating to the moment. You are relating to how it will be felt later. And that is something you cannot control, because their processing is internal, private, unspoken, happening outside of the moment you share. And that realization brings you to a choice, not based on confusion, based on clarity. Can you exist in a connection where timing is not aligned, where what feels real in the moment may shift later, where closeness is experienced differently across time? And that question is not about judgment, it's about alignment. Because some people can hold that, they can navigate the delay, they can understand it without losing themselves. But others begin to feel the cost of misalignment, the cost of inconsistency in emotional timing, the cost of experiencing something together, but not processing it together. And that cost builds slowly in how much you think, how much you analyze, how much you try to understand what shifted. Because without clarity, you turn inward, you question yourself, you adjust, you try to make things more stable. But now you don't have to, because now you see it. You see that the shift was not random, it was delayed. You see that the distance was not sudden, it was processed. You see that the change was not caused by one moment, it was shaped over time. And once you trust that, you stop chasing immediate answers for delayed experiences. You stop forcing clarity into moments that haven't fully unfolded yet for them. And more importantly, you stop losing yourself in the process, because you understand what is yours and what is not. The moment you shared was real. The connection you felt was real. But how it was processed after belongs to them, not you. And once you separate that, you come back to yourself, to your experience, to your clarity, to your sense of what feels aligned and what doesn't. And from that place, you don't just understand the pattern, you decide what you want to do with it, whether you continue in something where timing is always slightly off, or whether you choose something where experience is shared in real time, where connection doesn't need to catch up later, where what you feel together stays aligned as it grows. And that choice, even if it's quiet, even if it's internal, is where everything shifts. Because once you see clearly, you stop adapting to confusion and start aligning with clarity. And if this put words to something you've been experiencing, comment, I felt the delay. Because that moment, when you realize it wasn't inconsistency, it was timing, is the moment everything finally makes sense. If you want to go deeper into patterns like this, stay with the inner Odyssey. Because once you understand what's happening beneath the surface, you don't just experience connection differently, you choose it differently.